where you are as the primary host of your own show today?
Yeah, I think if without the Enlightened Heathens, I don't know if I'd have this podcast.
Now, do you miss that? I'm sorry to cut you off, but do you miss that like lack of pressure to where you have two other people to lean on?
Sometimes I think with a co-host, it's always easier because you have, you got two heads are better than one. You got another person you can bounce ideas off of, or even have a dialogue where you may have an opposition to what I'm thinking or what I'm saying. So it's easier in that sense. You can share the responsibilities on, coming up with content, coming up with articles to talk about or things to talk about. It's just a lot easier because you're not a one-man person,
As today's co-host, I would like to say today's fun fact is that giraffes are the only animal that doesn't make a sound. Did you know that?
I didn't know that. Really?
Yes. Now, I haven't fact-checked that in many, many moons, but I've been saying it for years. So if it's not true, then a lot of people will be upset at me, more so than just these listeners. But I do think that is a very interesting fact.
That is a super interesting fact. I don't know, like for such a big animal, you think they'd
I just imagine that the vocal cords can't reach to their mouth. If their vocal cords start in their chest, like I feel like my voice comes from my chest. As they say with your chest.
Yeah, I guess so.
Their chest is nowhere near their mouth. So maybe they do have vocal cords that just don't actually have enough sound to reach all the way up there. But
they don't make no sound.
That's a whole nother scenario. So we spoke on where you were, which was, as a co-host of the Enlightened Heathens. That was about 4 years ago or so.
Yeah, just about. Maybe, 4 years.
So we're here in 2020, September 15th-ish or something like that. 1204 San Diego, California. You, John Rosario, have been considering moving back to the East Coast.
Yes.
So, with that mindset, what differences, if any, would you think that it'll have to the podcast by moving back to East Coast?
I've said this previously. My network out here is barely a network at all. It's my own fault because I didn't go out and build one or establish one. Being from the East Coast, I mean, people who are listening now can clear as day see that I had 8 episodes of just interviews over the course of a week at home back in Philly.
At the block shop.
At the block shop. So safe to say my network is in Philly or just on the East Coast in general, because even people who aren't in Philly, they're in Jersey, they're in the tri-state area, some are in Virginia, whatever the case, some are in D.C. So if anything, I think it'd be easier to come up with content out there because of how many people how many people, just the network of people who are out there, content creators, people doing positive things, all the stuff that, you being the vice president of the block is back. You guys know a plethora of just other organizations that are helping out your cause while you help out their cause, and, just a ton of different things that are positive that I could, be able to give them a platform to speak on as well.
And if you have any at all, I know this is kind of spur of the moment, but is there, a couple of people who are not celebrities that you would love to have on the podcast coming soon?
In this, what do you mean?
Just obviously it could be back home, could be people out here, people you haven't had a chance to connect with yet, get on the right time with, but just someone whose story interests you enough to where, let's say you do end up back on the East Coast and you're in, upstate New York or, just outside of the city. Someone that you would be interested enough to travel to see, to, have that conversation with for the podcast. Is there anyone that stands out already, or is there a couple of stories you want to shed some light on?
Yeah. Haircuts for Homeless.
Yes. Shout outs to him. That's a friend of mine. Came to our, what was the event you sponsored last year? Peace and Play Day.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I always see him posting up some good stuff. There's like a traveling vet, I think, in New York. I think in New York there's actually what is it? It's almost like pit bulls and parolees. I don't know if you've seen that show.
I've heard of that, yeah.
Yeah. So they kind of help reestablish people who are coming out of jail by giving them jobs and also rehoming pit bulls or just other animals as well. I'd like to get more of those types of people on because they're also feel-good stories, but they're still doing good. I've mentioned this before in prior podcasts where it's like sometimes I want to share a story, but sometimes the stories are all just, dog makes adorable face at mailman. It's like it's a feel good story, but it's not really solving a problem or, coming up with a solution to.
It's a distraction. Just call it what it is. It's a distraction from the real positivity that's going on.
Right. So I want to do more meaningful. I want to bring light to more meaningful news that CNN and Fox and ABC and NBC and all those other news outlets and stories aren't bringing news to, that I think needs more. Because the way I look at it is if I'm able to build this platform to be something, let's say even a quarter of Joe Rogan's following, if I can do something like that and highlight I don't know, the guy who took some trash out of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. If I can bring a newsworthy story like that to the limelight and more people can find out about that, I can say indirectly people would be inspired to either donate or get involved, or it could be a chain reaction, and that organization who's solving that problem, like, this is a dream for me. That organization, that, whatever the organization is, but let's just say for this specific example, that organization can get more funds to help continue to solve that problem. And just indirectly through my podcast, because I provided a platform for people to understand, oh, snap, I didn't know this was a thing.
Mm-hmm. You put the limelight on them.
Yeah. That's basically my goal.
So you mentioned, having people be involved in the form of donating, and that leads to one of the questions I already had. So, hypothetical. From our episode, most recent one with the Black Kids Back, I spoke about how we need to continue dreaming, how we need to continue staying in the imagined space so we can move forward with high hopes. All right, random donor comes along. He says this person is gonna give you $9,999 tax free. That is a specific amount because anything higher needs to be reported to the IRS. So they're giving you that money to invest into the podcast. How would you spend it, and where do you see yourself after that spending? Okay, I would, for one, I'd hire a team. I'd pay them for the year. A hitman? No. Private investigators? Some like technical workers, I guess. Some maybe interns. Logistics? Some interns. Kind of just, so let me put that one on hold, or not even on hold, but this is going to answer a little bit to that. So when I first started, the goal was to interview somebody doing something positive. Then following that interview up with a YouTube episode of me going into whatever event that they are holding, that we talked about their positivity, and showing basically what it is that they talked about. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if you did your interview with Jack Costello Boxing Gym, after that, the next week you'll go do a video that shows their motion in action. You're in there with the youth, doing some drills, some warm-ups with them, and talking to them about what their story is maybe and why this boxing is so important. Exactly. Like Perfect example. You laid it out perfectly. That's my dream of what I want this podcast to be. I want it to be a YouTube channel and a podcast at the same time, so people can see that, people like to put a face to the name and to the voice and see what exactly it's about. Because we could sit here all day and talk about all the great things that we're doing, but when you see it, it's different. You can see the mannerisms. You can see, I always have an idea of what somebody looks like when I hear their voice, and then I actually see them, and it just completely changes. It's not always a good thing. It's not always a bad thing either. It is what it is. So if I can do that, so going back to your question, having those funds come in, I would hire a team to, one, show me and help me come up with better content, as well as video uploading, editing, doing all those things. And where I could, what's the second part of that? Where do I see myself after spending that money? Yes. I could see myself with a legitimate following and a bigger platform to showcase the people that I'm having on this podcast and the things that they're doing. Now, to move forward we spoke about the podcast a lot. Now let's talk about the man behind the podcast, which is something I always try to harp on when I tell you I'm listening. I want to make sure people know who you are. So, John, what is your personal dream?
My personal dream?
And you don't have to get too detailed into it. Just let people know something that it keeps you motivated.
My personal dream is to have a very nice home, close enough to my family where I can just take a drive and visit, have some kids, and honestly, the personal dream is to do this podcast and make money just doing this podcast alone. I don't have a boss. I come in, I have a team. We, maybe even having I wouldn't say a network, but maybe having an actual legitimate channel on YouTube that people are, thousands of people are tuning into every week just to see, what this week's episode is. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't think that's too much to ask.
It's not. And throughout your episodes to this point, you've mentioned, obviously, from Philly, you've had a background in the military and things of that nature. Give the people who, may have missed some things or still have some things unclear, a little brief background about you, where you're from, and your family, and, how big your family is and what they mean to you and things, where are your morals based at, essentially.
So, born and raised Philly. My dad is from Puerto Rico, but moved to Philly when he was young. My mom was born in New York, moved to Philly when she was young. They're both Puerto Rican. My grandparents are all from Puerto Rico. Born and raised in Philly. We grew up in what's called the Badlands in Philly, North Philly. I was raised in North Philly. I lived in Northeast Philly when I was a teenager, but mostly raised in North Philly, but not in the streets. A lot of people pride themselves on being, I was raised in the streets, doing whatever in North Philly, but I was raised in North Philly, but not allowed outside the house in North Philly. You know what I mean? Like, we were around it.
But for context, Philadelphia is just so small that even if you live in the Northeast or was considered a nicer neighborhood, you're a bike ride away from which you're trying to be kept from, which your parents likely told you can't go outside for.
Right.
It's right there. And, when you do go outside, you might link up with a cousin who is within that mix. Yeah, so even if you aren't necessarily in the streets, you're indirectly completely involved.
Yeah, so all my male cousins on my dad's side of the family, in and out of jail all their lives, even today. So, shit like that. So I seen it growing up. My dad went to prison when I was like, I don't even know how old I was. I just remember I remember learning to tie my shoes visiting my dad in jail. I know my mom was a single.
I really hope that wasn't like last year or something.
No. It was like, I think I was like 7 or something like that. But I remember my mom being a single mom. She worked 3 jobs, also still going to school, just to put me through school, because I went to Catholic school from kindergarten to 8th grade. Then she tried to put me in Catholic school for high school, and I lasted like 2 weeks. Then got kicked out and went to Northeast High School. Got expelled at the end of the year for there. Then I went to Lincoln, and then halfway through there, my mom put me in a charter school. Then some stuff happened, and I moved in with my dad, and then he took me out of the charter school, put me back in Lincoln. That's where I graduated. But I always actually wanted to be in the military.
Well, before you even get too much into that, I want to ask you, what are some of your standout pros and cons from your experience with the military?
Pros, good structure. I think a lot of people despise the military because they think it's just an industrial complex. It's a war machine. There's a one way of thinking, and all of those things may be true in a sense, but also it is a huge vehicle for a lot of people who live in poverty and lived in poverty to get out of poverty, to join that middle class or even, upper middle class or high class.
Would you say it's a benefit if your back is against the wall, if you have a scenario?
Absolutely. I don't ever, I had my own experience in the military, but I don't ever fault anybody so I see a lot of people, they talk about, especially now with the climate, the military is just this and it's just that.
I see people saying it's the equivalent of selling your body.
Yeah, and you know what?